Hello and welcome to today's live broadcast, CEO Fraud and the $2.3 billion mistake you cannot afford to make. This is Tom Bechtold, your host for Secure World's web conference series. Thank you all for joining us today. This broadcast will also be available on demand later this afternoon. Please feel free to ask questions of our presenters by typing into the Q&A box on the left side of the screen. Our presenters will answer as many questions as time will allow. Today's slide deck, as well as other documents relating to our topic, is available for download in the resource list, which should appear on the right side of the window. This can also be found in the menu bar at the bottom of the screen if you click on the green icon. We will have a short poll toward the end of our broadcast today. We do appreciate your feedback to these questions as our presenters will be discussing the results. This web conference offers CPE credits. You can download your certificate of attendance from the yellow icon in the menu bar at the bottom of the window. You do need to watch a minimum of 75 minutes to qualify for the certificate. This will be a pop-up, so you may need to allow pop-ups for that to appear. Alternatively, you will also receive an email acknowledging your attendance. That'll usually happen about mid-afternoon after you've finished watching. If you're on Twitter, we hope you'll join the conversation by using the hashtag SWWebcon. I'd like to thank our sponsor, KnowBe4, for helping to make today's web conference possible. Today's moderator is Sam Masiello. Sam has been working with email, messaging, and fighting internet pollution for over 25 years. Mr. Masiello currently serves as the CISO at Teletech, where he is responsible for the company's PCI, SOX, and SSAE compliance initiatives. Sam has also been part of the Secure World Advisory Council for the past 4 years. Welcome, Sam. Please kick things off with your opening remarks.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you everyone for joining us today. What a timely topic we have today. For those of you who have seen these types of email scams we're going to talk about today, certainly you understand the importance that these have to your organization and being able to stop these from potentially filtering data or filtering money out of your organization. In April 2016, the FBI issued its most recent warning about a dramatic increase in these types of CEO scams we're going to be talking about today. The Bureau estimates these scams have cost businesses more than $2.3 billion in losses between October 2013 and February 2016. Which is a dramatic increase over the losses they reported just 6 months prior, which were over, and I'm using air quotes here, only $700 million. So representing over 200% increase in just that 6-month period, that short 6-month period. Keep in mind that these are reported losses, which typically only represent a fraction of the total, the actual total, often due to a company's reticence to admit to having been scammed. So these scams are clearly increasing in prevalence, increasing in success, and as a result, we won't expect them to be going away anytime soon. While these email scams come in varying flavors, which we'll delve into more deeply during today's presentations, the ultimate goal of these scams are clear: to move large amounts of money out of an organization and offshore as quickly as possible, and 2, to obtain data that will enable a cyber thief to impersonate another's identity in order to perpetuate other scams. Very similar to what we see for a lot of the scams that are occurring on the internet today. No matter how extensive your security awareness training program is, your company is vulnerable to these attacks. Employees are quick to act when a financial request comes from the CEO, CFO, or another high-ranking company officer. What protocols do you have in place to make sure your team knows when an email is really coming from the C-level representative that is purported to be sending the email to you? During today's web conference, you'll learn how to avoid falling victim to these phishing scams and what to do. The discussions will include a demonstration on how these scams work and how prolific the scammers are, practical advice on avoiding social engineering tactics and learning how to teach your employees to guard their information as well as sensitive data on other employees, and detailed information on how to inoculate employees who fall victim for these social engineering attacks, along with tips to improve your security culture company-wide. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Today we have the privilege of hearing from 3 industry experts. We have Randy Lusky. Randy is a former federal prosecutor. Randy is now a partner in ORIC's San Francisco office and a member of the White Collar Criminal Defense and Corporate Investigations Group. We have Stu Sjouwerman. Stu is the founder and CEO of KnowBe4, who is our sponsor today, which hosts the world's most popular integrated security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. A data security expert with more than 30 years in the IT industry, Showerman was the co-founder of KnowBe4. And also we're going to have Chris Pearson, who is Dr. Chris Pearson, rather, I should say, who's the General Counsel and Chief Security Officer and EVP for Viewpost. Chris serves on the DHS Data Privacy and Integrity Advisory Committee and Cybersecurity Committee and is a Distinguished Fellow of the Ponemon Institute. So with that, I will hand the ball over to Chris for his opening remarks and presentation.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone from Secure World, as well as all of our audience members today. We have some great topics to talk about today as it relates to BEC fraud, CEO fraud, and this whole entire topic. Couldn't be more timely as we continuously are seeing these items and events pop into the headlines. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. I'm going to talk about things a little bit from a legal perspective, a little bit from a security perspective, and overall from a risk management and a business first perspective. So we're going to kind of intermix some of these items throughout today's presentation, quite honestly, given the background. These are complicated items and complicated issues. Please make sure that you're working with the right folks on the inside of your company, and especially if you have questions on the legal parameters around these items and some things that we're going to talk about, that you're working with your general counsel and other competent outside counsel on these issues. So as we talk about this issue, what is fundamentally, the reason why it is such an issue, such a hotbed topic, and really on the front of our radar screen? I mean, when you think about CEO fraud, BEC fraud, business email compromise fraud, when you think about those, they all exist and they're all successful because of one thing. Someone has found a way to engineer themselves, could be socially engineer or otherwise, but engineer themselves into the inner workings of the company and preying on the path of least resistance. They're able to take an employee's get up and go in willingness to solve a problem, to complete a transaction, to go ahead and complete a CEO or CFO or some other executive levels request in a very, very quick and expeditious manner. And oftentimes we find without a lot of forethought, without some slow thinking, and without a pause button on things. So we see a lot of CEO faked emails requesting monetary payments, monetary wires being sent out to a new company or a new account or a new project that's being worked on. But had we taken a look at some of the different controls that were in place, we would have been able to go ahead and prevent or mitigate the chances of those attacks being successful. But it definitely preys on this path of least resistance. These emails, these communications trigger this inherent sense of urgency, this need to fix or need to please or need to go ahead and accomplish goals within employees within multiple different units, obviously within finance unit as well as within, we're seeing more and more within the HR business line. But that is why many of these are successful and more successful in their nature. We are able to solve for these through multiple different methods, but it's not just going to be a technology implementation. It's not going to be a process fix entirely. It's not just going to be a people issue. We're going to really have to focus on all three of those areas in order to move ahead in this realm and to go ahead and mitigate the harm that is being done that is causing this path of least resistance, a sense of urgency to be so overwhelming and to really drive back into the pocket of the cyber criminal. So as we talk about these, I mean, you see the facts and you see the figures out there. Literally, since October of 2013, the FBI, and once again, this is going to be a lowball number. It's much worse than this. $2.3 billion in losses. It's $2.3 billion. Right now, $400 to $500 billion is about what we see overall in terms of cybercrime, reported cybercrime, everywhere. And if you take a look at that number, $2 billion since 2013 on BEC and CEO compromise fraud, we just continue to increase the losses here, many of which are uninsured. Now, there's some interesting questions there, and there are some interesting debates going on. Suffice it to say, this area is very unsettled, but these are big losses, very big losses, and sometimes for small companies that are causing other impacts on them. So definitely a big problem that we have to get our arms around. So let's talk about some of the different types. I break these down into, there's traditionally 3 different types. I add a 4th, but let's talk about them and understand them a little bit. So the CEO or business executive email. This is really where somebody is pretending to be someone who they're not, and they're requesting something that is financially related. Usually it is, it could be because of a compromised email account and the ability for someone to send as the CEO. More oftentimes than not, it's actually something that is a very, very similar, confusingly similar domain name, such as, Bob Jones instead of abc.com, it's at adc.com. And so confusingly similar domain that they now own using the name as it would appear in your normal Active Directory account of the CEO. And moving quite quickly, folks in finance or other departments will go ahead and see that, be confused, and go ahead and do a reply or take action based off of that email. We see this bogus invoice type of email where either is sent to an employee or a hacked account, and it's really for legitimate looking products or services, but the payments are going to a different account. So through some type of internal compromise, the cyber criminals are able to go ahead and transfer the money to another account, and that's where the funds go. Company requests, so somewhat of the same thing, hacked employees sending this out to third parties, and once again, the accounts, the funds are transferred into a third account. The second and third item is more related to an internal compromise, internal access to somebody's email to be able to take where payments should be going and to change that information so that funds are diverted elsewhere. The first one is really where I think we need to spend some good time discussing, as well as this last and fourth one. So we're seeing a change a little bit from pure financially driven BEC and CEO fraud to ones that are more identity theft related. So you all will have seen some news in the past month or two regarding the HR departments of several even high-tech companies that received requests for the employee extracts out of ADP or similar types of systems. And so HR professionals were confused by this, went ahead and did extracts of that information from ADP or whatever payment provider they are using, and go ahead and send that information out to that party. And of course, that extract definitely comes in terms of Social Security numbers and other sensitive PII being a part of that file. I think we're going to continue to see some increases in terms of the HR attacks regarding PII and even W-2 information. So something to definitely keep on the top of your minds as we move through these scenarios. So once again, I think we definitely need to pay attention to the CEO fraud item and the increase in HR types of fraud incidents, because both of these can be very, very well controlled for, and we'll talk about some of that now. Obviously, having the right types of reasonable security and controls will solve and protect much more of item 2 and 3 in terms of fraud scenarios. So what do you do? What are we talking about? Some of this is the good old standbys, right? Things that we need to be doing better, things we need to be doing in increasing repetition and increasing sophistication of in terms of our tests. Phishing training and email training. So phishing training, obviously we can do more of this. The last conference I just spoke at 2 weeks ago in Boston, we were discussing this very topic, and no more than 1/3 of the attendees raised their hands when they were asked about phishing education and training in a continual and repetitive manner. So these more seemed like one-off training sessions. We can do a lot better here in terms of being skeptical, training people, and making sure that they forward those emails to the right people at the company so that the information security professionals can take a look at it. Email training. Some folks do not understand the basics of email. You can say that you're a dog, you can say you're the Pope, you can say anything in terms of your username. Yes, there are different controls there in terms of SPF and DKIM and some other things that we can do, but there's a great way to be able to spoof or call yourself whoever you want to, and of course get confusingly similar domain names. We need to teach our people very, very simple ways of looking at some of these things so they're able to do a first blush look at, does this seem legitimate or not? Moving into, especially when we talk about financial losses, a lot of this comes back to maintaining good, reasonable controls, good processes, dual verification controls and processes within the finance department. There should be no reason that an email that is received with urgent stamped all over it from the CEO is a last-ditch effort to get the $200,000, the $1 million, the $2 million transferred to some foreign offshore account for some business deal that you've never heard of, even though you're in the finance department. There's no reason for that. There's no reason for that not to be looked at by someone else and for us to go ahead and really cull through things. Same thing in terms of procurement and legal processes. By ensuring that we know who the vendors are at a given company, that the legal department takes and ties a contract to a procurement request, to a funding request. Those are going to be important processes that exist. They exist now. We just need to go ahead and keep the tires on them and make them a little better. And finally, one of the most important controls ever is this thing on the right-hand side. It's called a telephone. You don't have to use the rotary dial one. You can use something that's more fancy. But at the end of the day, the telephone and talking and communicating, especially for those of us that are at global organizations and organizations with wide footprints, at the end of the day, the telephone is many times going to be one of the tools that we use to defeat these types of attacks, these types of tactics that are employed by cyber attackers on our companies. Very, very important tool that we sometimes forget a lot about. So let's talk about some of the actual controls that we need to have and some of the different things that need to be put in place, especially around education. So education can be very, very, very effective at identifying these types of fraudulent attempts, at identifying these types of fraudulent emails, at educating people about phishing, at educating people about email and how to receive it and what it means. So these can be very, very effective. Sometimes you can have issues when scaling these. And that just really depends upon the size and complexity of your organization. But that doesn't mean that we should not be doing it and trying it. We might have to get a little more deep-seated in these types of education and more on-site there when you're talking about global organizations. These are very, very people-intensive in terms of overall education. And sometimes you see some problems with customs and norms and language barriers as you move about the globe. But that's when you're talking about your really, really large organizations that will have the manpower and the footprint and the ability to get in front of people no matter where they are. Really, we need to go ahead and work on these as well as some other technical controls. Education is absolutely one of the best ways to go ahead and prevent or at least be able to detect when these types of attacks occur. When we're talking about technical controls, and we can go on and on this topic, obviously making sure we have the right defensive mechanisms in terms of anti-spam and email gateways and trying to weed these out as far away from the corporate servers as possible and the corporate exchange as possible, making sure that we have the right proxy filters in place, the right types of identifiers of compromise, indicators of compromise types of tools and technologies on the inside. But more times than not, there is no payload that's necessarily attached with a business email compromise fraud scheme. When you see in the first and fourth example, there's no payload there. It's simple a social engineering attack. Where you do see payloads involved is more in the second and third area, where you actually have an email account that's been taken over because there's been a compromise at the company. And as a result, someone is able to masquerade as Betty, as John, as Billy within the finance department and request a change in funds going to from one account to another account. And that's where these controls come in a little bit more. DNS, DMARC, SPF, DKIM, these are all great controls that we can implement to be able to make sure that we know who we're talking to and that we're talking to the right individual within the company. Oftentimes, we don't see some, what I think are relatively rudimentary types of controls put in place. And I think these go a long way in terms of identifying these types of attacks and preventing them. So let's walk through a few of them. So every single company knows who its executive team is. Every single company knows who its financial leaders are. and you can determine based off the footprint that you have on the web as well as through LinkedIn and other types of public postings, you can determine what other people would be able to see or glean from doing research and analysis on your company. It's very, very easy, and if you're a public company, there's no way to shy away from this, no way to get away from this whatsoever. So very easily, one of the things that folks could be doing is identifying those individuals, let's call it the 10 key executives, or those that actually have the power to be able to facilitate something like this, HR and finance heavy, obviously, and go ahead and identify all amalgamations of their email, of their name. So Christopher.T.Pearson, Chris.T.Pearson, Chris-Pearson, Christopher-Pearson, C. Pearson, Pearson C., etc. We're able to go ahead and put in controls that actually look through all the different potential from addresses, whether it be a Gmail, Yahoo, doesn't matter, so that we can prevent anyone from impersonating a current existing executive in the company or someone more deeply situated within HR finance from being able to send from any remote email address email into a company. It's a great, great way to go ahead and chop things off right then and there from people being able to send email into a company. We're able to increase controls on specific teams. So right in the 80-20 rule, let's go ahead and spend 80% of our time on this item. That is going to block these attacks from happening. We know that in order to be successful from a financial perspective, they have to get into someone in finance. We know from an HR perspective, they have to get into someone from HR. And we know that most likely, it's going to need to be a command that is issued by somebody on the executive team. So let's focus all of our time and attention and energy on increasing the controls in those areas. For some of this, it might be increasing the technical controls. For some of it, it might be increasing the education. For others, it's increasing the awareness and having in extra procedures, right? Double duty on everything over certain dollar amounts or without pre-approval, et cetera. There are different things that we can be doing here that are quite honestly just part of normal, good GAAP control procedures related to finance. Let me give you an example, HR. So if you have an HR team and you have HR recruiters, their sole job is to open up emails from strangers, click on documents from strangers, and review them on a day-to-day basis. They are definitely a weaker point in the information security chain because the edict of not opening up email or attachments from people you don't know doesn't apply. Yes, I realize that there are the automated systems by which you can get in resumes and get in feedback there, but still, nonetheless, those are being delivered directly to the HR professionals who are opening up the email, and it's not unseen for things to still come in one-to-one, even with those automated systems in place. But we can spend more of our time, more of our controls on these areas and get a better bang for our buck. In terms of policies and dual processes, this is somewhere else that we can go ahead and take that which we've created for in-person transactions, even though those are dwindling these days and that electronic transactions are rapidly increasing. We can go ahead and take those and apply those back over to the electronic world to make sure that we have those verifications before wires go out, before ACHs go out, et cetera. Let's go ahead and move over to one last, actually this will be the second to last topic that we talk about, assurance. So when we talk about assurance, this means that we have some type of auditing capability on phishing emails, spoofed accounts, BEC, CEO fraud. Better for us to find out internally within the company that there's an issue than from external pen testers. Better to find out from external pen testers that there's an issue than from real cyber criminals. Making sure that we have internal assurance processes in place and are exercising in this area is critically important to the success to be able to defeat these. Second, external. Making sure that we are working in collaboration with others on this topic, making sure that we are moving forward in terms of the different audits here and pen testers. This is absolutely, absolutely critical to completing the cycle in the chain of making sure that we have the right controls at the right level for the company. Now, I want to move into one final topic before we turn things back over, and that topic is really the topic of insurance. So this is becoming a bigger area and a little bit of differences occurring within the circuits as a result of some of the differing opinions and, quite honestly, the variance in the policies. So I cannot tell you or predict what your policy says or what it has, but we can talk about this generally. Every policy is different, every carrier is different, and the language and how it applies to your company based off the facts are going to be dramatically different. But usually the CGL policies are not enough covering cybercrime. Now, there's been some differences here. There's one court that just recently decided that, yes, it was. It was kind of silly to have to get a separate policy for everything, and this was a generally covered business practice in terms of your computer being in the internet age, using the internet, and that was a harm that was going to be covered. But you have different courts deciding different things. Definitely strongly suggest that you look towards your cybersecurity policy or your fraud policies and the limits, and definitely talk about fraud coverage in terms of BEC, CEO fraud coverage. It won't be by that name, but you need to be very, very granular and crystal clear with your providers about whether this will be covered and why and how, and make sure that you have writers that describe that type of harm to the company and what may or might happen as a result. Right now, if you have a loss, whether it's covered or not, doesn't matter. You're still probably going to get a reservation of rights letter, which basically says, we're going to go ahead and pay for now your fees and expenses, but we reserve our rights to do so in the future and to pull back that money. Some of these, as insurance companies are doing, they're fighting whether they're covered or not. A lot of this is based off of financial instrument being a definition. So in terms of fraud overall, it has to be something where there was a financial instrument that was involved. Many policies, I should say. This doesn't apply to all, but the fraud has to actually involve a financial instrument. If it does not involve a financial instrument and some type of fraud related to that, because the policies have not evolved to where we are right now, then there may be no coverage for these types of claims. So a financial instrument is going to be something like a fraudulent check, a fraudulent conveyance document, something that is actually a negotiable document, a negotiable legal tender, or financial tender, excuse me. An email that says, I am the CEO, I can't believe you didn't get out this wire to our Chinese acquirers, it's super duper emergency, and it's going to cost us an extra few million tomorrow for tax implications, all the rest. Send the money now, here's the wiring instructions. That's a fake email, but it's not a fraudulent financial instrument. And that seems to be where a lot of these carriers are actually hanging their hat. Now, there was no financial instrument that was fraudulently conveyed, and since there were no issues there, there is no type of coverage. Once again, every policy is different. The language within same policies but same carriers are different, and how it applies to you and your actual company is also going to be different based upon your total coverage. So with that said, really want to thank everyone for their time and attendance, kind of turn things over to Sam and go on from there.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Pearson. That was extremely educational and a lot of information in there. Before we move on to Randy, I do want to pose a couple of questions to you, though, based off of your presentation. So based on the small percentage of companies that you noted earlier that are actually doing phishing training, as a method to continue educating the employees and the employee base, especially the ones who are being targeted by these phishing and BEC type scams, who would you recommend partnering with inside your company to help mitigate some of the risks associated with this type of fraud?
Yeah, great question. Look, you have to go ahead and communicate with your legal department, and the insurance coverage, whether it's owned by legal or finance, that's going to be depending upon your company, but definitely start out with the lawyers in terms of finding out what types of coverages you have. Also, strong partnership has to be in terms of the finance department. That's probably the first stop I would make is finance. That's where your company will see the immediate harm, the immediate loss if the money goes out the back door as a result of some type of scam. And HR is a close second, or quickly becoming a close second, as well as the executive team. But we have to also reach out to others in terms of making sure they know to pick up the phone. Nothing is so critical. There's only, the speed of light and deals and all the rest matters in the merger and acquisition world, in matters of at certain dates and time in the calendar year more than others, but realistically, there are very, very few and far emergencies that occur at the speed that is being suggested by the emails that we are seeing and that people are falling prey to. So partner with finance, HR, legal, as well as your security team.
Absolutely great advice. One other question for you. So knowing that, like in security, there is never a silver bullet for any particular thing, and you note a lot of different various technical controls one can implement, various ways to implement education. You talked a little bit about insurance. Again, knowing that there is no one silver bullet, if you had to prioritize, right, you gave a lot of different suggestions. If one were to start off trying to build up a program on mitigating these types of scams, and you had to start off, what is the one control you would start with to help combat this problem, and why?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to tell you two things. Number one, first, you have to have education across the company. Education is going to be the best control because you are able to spot and identify these types of scams. Tied with that is going to be the telephone. We do not pick up the phone enough. Even in companies that are at the same floor, same side of the floor, people are not picking up the phone and calling saying, did you really mean for me to send these $2 million to X, Y, and Z's account in the bank of X, Y, and Z? Did you really mean for that? Is that really you? We're not utilizing the telephone. And that's really sad, but it's becoming increasingly, it's just increasing in all types of scams and all types of social engineering that we're not picking up the phone. So education, absolutely. But, if you want to go for a control, the telephone is going to be one of our best controls.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Pearson. Really appreciate that, and we'll hear from you more during the open Q&A later on. With that said, let's hand the floor over to Randy Lusky, who, if you don't mind, Randy, giving a brief introduction of yourself and then going into your presentation. The floor is yours.
Sure thing. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Randy Lusky, and I'm a partner at the Orrick firm here in San Francisco, and I'm a member of Orrick's White Collar and Corporate Investigations Group. I was an assistant United States attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California here in San Francisco from 2011 through 2014. And I had no idea when I returned to private practice that I would all of a sudden become a specialist in representing companies who had been victimized by something called the business email compromise scam. But here we are. And I want to thank Chris for providing a very detailed and comprehensive overview of what that scam entails. In 2015 alone, we were retained by the board of directors of 3 prominent Bay Area companies who had each suffered major losses as a result of the CEO fraud scam that was just described. We also assisted 2 law firms that fell victim to versions of this attack. One of them was actually the bogus invoice scheme that was also previously described. For each of these 5 clients, we conducted thorough internal investigations where we engaged forensic vendors, reviewed emails, and talked to dozens of witnesses, all in an effort to determine exactly what had happened, determine what internal control failures had allowed the incident to happen, and then determine how these companies could make sure that it never happened again. We have also worked with law enforcement in an effort to recover the stolen funds in each of these cases, and so I'll tell you some war stories, or one in particular about those efforts in conjunction with law enforcement, which have been rather fascinating. So my plan today is to give you a view really from the inside of those, or of one of these CEO fraud attacks. I want to take you into the front lines of this battle and tell you the story from the perspective of a few of the companies that have fallen victim to this scam. And then after that, I'd like to step back from the 5 BEC fraud matters that we have handled and talk about some of the common denominators that we are observing in each of these fraud schemes so that we can better understand how to detect and prevent these attacks in the future. So I won't belabor this point about the rise of the business email compromise scam because both Sam and Chris have already talked about these numbers, which are really quite alarming. The FBI estimates 1.2 billion in losses worldwide as a result of the BEC scam. In less than 2 years, there have been over 700,000 U.S. victims alone. One of the questions that I saw from the audience was that these numbers seem too high, but in my experience, I think it's actually the opposite. I mean, these numbers that we're seeing don't account for the last 6 to 8 months of activity, during which time I know there have been at least 2 or 3 large additional BEC attacks here in the Bay Area, including one for approximately $50 million. So these numbers absolutely seem high, but they're high for a reason, and that reason is that companies still to this day continue to fall victim to this scam. These numbers are not merely academic. They represent real, tangible losses for these companies. In my conversations with the FBI, the agents that I am working with say that the victims of these fraud scams have successfully recovered stolen funds in less than 4% of these cases. In less than 4% of these cases are victims catching the fraud in enough time to successfully use a fraud alert to stop the proceeds from being transferred to the conduit bank, or are they quickly enough working with law enforcement to somehow stop the transfer of these funds. It's important to remember that these numbers also relate exclusively to the BEC fraud scam. So this only includes the CEO fraud attack that Chris previously talked about and the bogus invoice scam. That's it. These numbers don't include some of the older scams that we've heard about over the years. One of them we used to refer to as the Jimmy John scam. That was when fraudsters would alter the one single letter in a domain name in an effort to try and hopefully trick the recipient into thinking that it was coming from an internal domain name by not catching this one little alteration in the name. Spoofers have gotten more sophisticated, and now they're using exact domain names. But the point is that these numbers don't reflect old iterations of these spoofing attacks. They rely on just 2 simple tricks. One is the CEO fraud, where a spoofed email is sent out impersonating a high-ranking executive to someone in finance or accounting or treasury and commanding them to wire out money for some reason. I've seen different iterations and different rationales for that. And second is the bogus invoice scam, where you have a spoofed email that is sent impersonating a vendor, usually a vendor or a landlord or some other entity with a pre-existing financial relationship. So that's it. These don't include real deal cyber attacks. It's just these 2 iterations of the scam. It's jaw-dropping to think how successful they've been. So every time that I think that people have finally learned to look out for these emails, we get another call from another client or others in my network telling me that it's happened again. What do these numbers tell us loud and clear? They tell us that the status quo methods to combat BEC fraud are simply not working. They're insufficient. They tell us 2 things. First, they tell us that our newfound focus on sophisticated cyber attacks may not have come with sufficient attention being paid to the rather unsophisticated cyber scams that are floating around out there. Companies have made significant investments in new tools, network architecture, consultants, IT personnel, those sorts of things to help prevent and prepare for real deal cyber attacks, systems level intrusions, data breaches, very savvy hacking networks. But from my vantage point, it appears that there has been less of a focus on unsophisticated cyber attacks like this BEC fraud scam. I call it unsophisticated because literally anyone can do this. I mean, I'm a poli-sci major and a lawyer with no tech background, and me and an associate here at Oric figured out how to create one of these spoof emails in about 2 hours of online research. I mean, that's all it takes. You register a new domain name, and you essentially, with that new domain name, then get a working SMTP server and some mailing software that allows you to input a new name into the from field, so that any emails you send from that domain name do not look like they are coming from that particular mail from address or mail from header, and rather are coming from whatever from field that you enter into the mailing software. And so these days it's very easy for a fraudster to create an email that looks like it is coming from your company or your organization. And most SPF filters just aren't catching this. Most SPF filters, all they do is confirm that the domain name that this email is coming from matches the IP address that it's coming from. But to execute that match, they are using the domain name that is associated with the mail from header. That header is not typically visible to the average recipient. And so you have to dig down into the metadata to really see if the mail from header is different from this from header. And so in each of the BEC scams that we've worked on, all 5 of them relied on a simple sleight of hand where the fraudster simply changed the from header to make it look like it was coming from the CEO or senior leadership of the company that was being victimized. And if you really dug into the code and the metadata, you would see that the mail from header was very different. But the SPF filters, they don't catch that. So I think that part of this phenomenon is a result of not enough attention being paid to these fairly unsophisticated attacks. And I think there's a second large contributing factor here, which is that Chris talked a lot about how we need more education and awareness, and that is absolutely the case. I want to echo that. But one thing I'm seeing is that even where there's education and awareness, even where companies are diligently trying to provide that education, it seems to be falling on deaf ears. What we are seeing is that even employees that have been specifically warned about this particular version of the scam, they are still falling victim to it for some reason. It's just that convincing. There's something about receiving a direct email from your CEO asking you personally to work on a confidential project that makes you feel very special. It's intoxicating. And it causes the recipient to overlook obvious red flags. I mean obvious red flags that we're seeing in these cases. Typos, references to federal agencies that don't exist. And the victims in these cases are, for the most part, fairly sophisticated, smart, educated people that have been with these companies for years, if not, decades. And even these people are willing to overlook red flags and forget what they have specifically been trained to look out for. In sort of a shocking example of this phenomenon, in one of the 5 BEC cases that we were hired to work on last year, we at Oric had previously drafted and sent we had sent this company a client alert telling them to be on the lookout for this specific fraud scam. I drafted it up and described the CEO fraud scam in some detail. I talked about the various ways that employees should be on the lookout for this specific type of email. We talked about IT controls and wire approval controls that could be put in place to help prevent these scams. That client alert was received by the general counsel of one of our clients. It was then sent by the GC to the controller of one of our clients. The controller read our client alert, acknowledged it, and responded to the GC, "Wow, scary stuff." And you know the punchline. You know where this is heading. 3 weeks later, after responding in that way, the controller fell victim to that very fraud scam, to the CEO fraud. Received the fake email from the CEO, and before you know it, millions of dollars were out the building, were out the door. And so at the end of the day, this is a scam that survives and succeeds because of this psychological phenomenon. You can adjust internal controls and IT controls and wire approval policies, but ultimately it's all about the people and getting them to be vigilant. One question that I saw on the list of questions that had been submitted by the audience was, how do we train the C-suite to look out for these type of scams? But in my experience, I have to say, the people that are really falling victim to this aren't the C-level executives. They are senior members of finance, accounting, and treasury departments. So people with their hands on the money, people with discretion and ownership over the wiring function at the companies. The numbers on this last slide that we saw are awe-inspiring, and they're fascinating to talk about, but I have to tell you that it's truly tragic when you go inside these companies and hear the victims tell their stories. So the view from the front lines is what I'd like to talk about next. I've listed here a few examples of the various BEC fraud scams we've worked on. The Zoom Corporation matter is the only one I've disclosed the name of the company because that was a high-profile BEC fraud that was disclosed publicly in company filings, including 8Ks and 10Ks. And so I can talk at a high level about that attack. Through our representation in these cases, I've spent dozens of hours in conference rooms with the victim employees who have fallen victim to these scams. And I've watched them come to tears when they describe the moment when they realized it was all a scam. And we've had a chance to see the financial devastation that this scam has left in its wake. It really is a life-changing event for these companies. In the Zoom case, the fraudster caused the victim, who was the head of Treasury, to wire out $31 million of the company's money. This was all of their Q4 earnings. A company that had just recently gone public and was on the path towards either acquisition or an IPO. And this incident alone almost derailed their acquisition by PayPal that happened about a year after the incident. In the second example, the clothing retailer case mentioned here, the company was planning on going public, and this incident pushed back those plans and has continued to do so. In the mortgage company case that's listed here, they lost approximately 1/3 of their entire balance sheet as a result of this scam. It resulted in company-wide layoffs, truly tragic ramifications for the company. And these BEC fraud victims range from large companies to small companies, public to private, East Coast to West Coast. It cuts across all industries. The fraudsters really do not discriminate. One question I saw in the questions for the audience was, how have law firms avoided this scam? And the answer, as you can see from bullet points 4 and 5 here on this slide, is they have not. We've represented 2 law firms that have fallen victim to the BEC fraud scam. Now, the numbers are much lower, but the point remains that we've seen law firm finance departments receiving emails that appear to be coming from chief practice group officers at law firms, managing partners at law firms, chairmen at law firms, chief administrative officers at law firms. And so the same kind of common denominators that we see at play in the corporate context are also unfolding in the legal arena. So what I'd like to do is just give you a view from the front lines and explain the chronology of one of these CEO fraud attacks using one of these examples. It's easy to talk about this stuff in the abstract, but I thought it might help to hear a real-life example. And so I'm going to focus on the second matter we worked on, the private San Francisco-based clothing retailer. I won't say the name of the company, and I've changed the names of the individuals involved, but I thought it would help to provide some details. So in this case, the controller was on vacation and received the following email on her iPhone. Again, I've changed the names here to protect the innocent, but one of the audience members submitted a question and asked to see a real example. So here you go. So the header on the iPhone when this email came in showed that the from line of the email was coming in from the CEO. It was the CEO's exact email address. If you were just looking at this on your iPhone, you would think that there was nothing abnormal about the way that the email address was set forth. The email said, Jane, in regards to an acquisition, capitalized acquisition that we are working on, attorney James Klein will be getting in contact with you. If you can please devote your full attention and comply with any request that he makes, we will need to proceed with several payments in regards to this operation. He will further explain to you how to execute the wire instructions following the regulatons in place. And that's not a typo in my slide here. That was a typo in the original email. Regulatons in place. Over the last few months, we have been working on this in coordination with and under the supervision of the SEC, and it is crucial for the company this operation is executed swiftly and efficiently. You have my full approval to proceed with any payments that he may request on my behalf. You need to keep this matter extremely confidential, as you are the only one who is currently aware of the situation. You will need to maintain complete silence and work exclusively with James. Any questions you may have must be addressed directly to him. We will be going public with the acquisition next week, and the rest of the company will be made aware. I will personally meet with you and James a couple of days prior and expect to be fully updated on your progress. Thank you for treating this with your utmost attention. Best regards, the CEO. And this email was almost identical to the email that we had seen in the prior investigation we had worked on. We saw typos, we saw acquisition being capitalized, we saw the same sense of secrecy and urgency that was highlighted, and as Chris discussed in his presentation. In this case, the CEO was in the company's San Francisco office and the controller was in the company's San Diego office. So the fraudster either got lucky or knew that the CEO and the controller were not in the same office. But it meant that there was less chance that the controller would actually, pop into the CEO's office in person and ask about this acquisition or put in a call to the CEO. Although I will say that being in the same office doesn't necessarily impede the success of this scam. In the Zoom case, the CEO was sitting 4 doors down from the head of Treasury that fell victim to the scam. And that individual sent out $31 million over the course of 14 days without ever checking in with the CEO. In this case, the controller did not question the authenticity of this email. The controller, in this case, just like the victims in the other cases we've worked on, did not think that it was odd that the general counsel and the CFO would be excluded from talk about a potential acquisition, and instead it would be done confidentially with only the CEO. The controller immediately replied that she was on it and that she understood the confidentiality restrictions. The reply on the controller's iPhone did not show that mail from address that I talked about earlier. And so if the controller had been at her computer and had actually replied, then on her Outlook screen she would have seen a mail from reply address that looks very different from her CEO's. It would have been from a strange domain name like dr.siku.org. The iPhone also similarly didn't show that mail from address. So she replied to the email and said that she was on it. 30 minutes later, sure enough, she receives an email from none other than James Klein at consultant.com. So this attorney, James Klein, that is apparently working with this large San Francisco-based company, and was also apparently an M&A lawyer from a prominent London law firm with a real bio online. He was emailing from a consultant.com email address. And guess what? In the prior investigations we had worked on, we had seen the same domain name from the fake lawyer, consultant.com. And in both of those cases, that did not operate as a red flag to tell the controller or the finance executive that something fishy was going on. They were willing to overlook obvious red flags. So James Klein asked the controller if she was available to speak, and she said that she was. They had a call where James explained that there was an acquisition in the pipeline and that the company needed to send a series of wires to the target company that we would be acquiring and would need to pay the selling shareholders of that target company. James emphasized the confidentiality of these transactions and said he had spoken to the CEO and she was very pleased that the controller was helping. The first payment would be for $3.5 million and was due in 90 minutes. The controller received an email with wiring instructions from James Klein following this phone call and immediately emailed a staff accountant who authorized and asked that accountant to authorize the first transfer, which the accountant did. And this song and dance happened 4 times over the next 18 hours. New shareholders that needed new money and involved new wire accounts. Another phone call, another discussion with James Klein, and another wire was sent out the door. By the afternoon the following day, $12 million had left the building, and all of it had been sent to Hong Kong banks. At one point, the controller called one of the phone numbers back that had showed up on her caller ID, and a random person responds who didn't speak English. But again, she thought nothing of that, and didn't think that was an obvious red flag. Later the next afternoon, the fraudster got greedy and said that another payment of $15 million was next up. The controller asked about the total value of the acquisition, and it seemed out of whack with the company's operating account. And so on her way home, she realized something was fishy, and you know the rest. She finally reached out to her CEO. The CEO said, "I have no idea what you're talking about," and they reached out to us here at Oric, thankfully, that next morning. And we immediately reached out to the FBI, who opened the matter. We received authority to begin recording phone calls with James Klein. We used the controller in a sting operation and continued to work through a series of phone calls with law enforcement in an effort to make it look like we were continuing to send money to James Klein. We recorded a number of these phone calls and worked with both Oric's Hong Kong office and also the Hong Kong Police Department to take a number of steps that would help us get the money back. Oric's Hong Kong office filed formal court orders to enjoin the accounts of the Hong Kong banks that the money had been sent to, and we also approached those banks informally in Hong Kong. Through the use of the FBI operation and the involvement of Hong Kong police, we ultimately recovered every last penny, and also were able to make an arrest when someone came into the bank branch in Hong Kong to withdraw $5 of the $12 million that we had kept in an open account, just to see if anyone would come in to access it. But the other 4 cases that we handled did not have such a happy ending, and in that one I really just think we got lucky, mainly because of how quickly the company reached out to law enforcement. In that case, like in all the others that I've worked on, we investigated the matter and concluded that there had been no systems intrusion, there had been no internal misconduct, no one was in on it. In each of these cases, we identified areas where there may have been some possible social engineering. So the fraudsters may have attempted to make phone calls to lower-level assistants in an effort to determine when the CEO was going to be out of the office, but we couldn't confirm that in any of those cases. So again, a fairly unsophisticated scam that involved no real systems-level intrusion. So I want to talk about a few of the key common features of the successful BEC attack that we're seeing in each of the cases that we've worked on. So backing up from just the retail company attack that I talked about before, one of the key features that we're seeing is that this spoof email, the key email that really sets in motion this chain of events, it's very similar from case to case. Now you'll see different iterations of the purported rationale for needing the money, whether it's an acquisition or some other large financial transaction or paying off a vendor. The concept remains the same, is that you have a spoof email that appears to come from a very high-level executive, usually the CEO or someone else in an authority position. You see a spoof of that email that appears to have passed through any email filtering controls that the company has in place. And so Chris previously talked about certain SPF controls. Our experience in investigating these matters has been that most garden variety SPF filters are not catching these BEC spoof emails, but that there are there's a menu now of more robust filtering controls that Microsoft Outlook and other providers offer that will catch these types of spoof emails. Some of those controls that were mentioned before are called DMARC and DKIM. And it's our understanding that these tools that Microsoft and others offer will catch that scenario where you have a mail from address or a mail from message header that is different from the from field which is visible to the recipient. And that's a critical detection technique, because in all 5 of the cases we've worked on, that was one common denominator. If you dug into the metadata, the mail from was different from the from field. Common denominators of the CEO fraud scam that we're seeing in the marketplace. First, the CEO fraud, although it's unsophisticated, it is very well researched. The fraudsters are targeting the perfect victim and the perfect role. And so what I mean by that is that they are finding it's clear that these are targeted and surgical strikes. It's not like the good old days where you see 20, 30, 40 employees of a company getting the same boilerplate, obvious spoof email. These attacks are surgical. They look for one employee that has authority over wiring abilities, and they're usually finding that information from LinkedIn. In a lot of the cases that we worked on, we see that the LinkedIn description for the role of the target victim made it clear that they had wiring authority. A lot of times people are sort of bragging about this in their LinkedIn profiles. I supervise a treasury team that has authority over, $200 million in transactions monthly, something like that. These are the perfect victims. They are the people that have their hands on the money, and oftentimes they have their hands on the money and also the wire approval policies that allow them to execute wires without much in the way of additional approvals. The perfect victim, though, requires more than just the perfect role. It also requires the perfect personality. And a lot of times I think that the fraudsters are just getting lucky in terms of the perfect personality. But I will tell you, after having met a number of these victims, you see some common denominators in terms of the personality. It's the person that's willing to take a bullet for the company, the person that has been there for 7, 8, 9 years and involves themselves in the strategy of the company and believes that they are a part of the inner fabric of the company. And so to them, it's realistic and not out of the norm for the CEO to be reaching out to them to help with a special project. Finally, my day has arrived. The CEO has tapped me to be the person and the only person to help with this special endeavor. And it takes the right personality. These aren't dumb people. Incredibly smart, successful people at companies. One of them, the controller that I mentioned before, had been with the company for 19 years. One of the most trusted advisors at the company. Not gullible people, but people willing to overlook red flags. Second common denominator we see is urgency, requests for confidentiality. We spoke about this earlier. There's always a premium on acting fast in the modern business world, but we need to encourage people to slow down. And a lot of the times, as Chris mentioned before, these requests that we see in these emails, the request for urgency, it doesn't make sense. There's never a time when you should need to wire out $3 million within 90 minutes before consulting with general counsel, before consulting with the chief financial officer of a company about an impending acquisition. When you take a step back, you realize that these requests for urgency are not based in logic. And the request for confidentiality, it's obvious. That has to be a key part of this scam. Otherwise, the scam doesn't work, right? You've got people that are receiving this email that oftentimes work 20 feet away from the person who purportedly sent the email. And they're not popping in that person's office to say, hey, are we cool before I send this next $3 million? We're not even seeing that level of communication, just a quick check-in. So for the scam to succeed, you need no communication between the victim and the purported CEO or the actual CEO. And that requires a strong request for confidentiality. So we need to educate employees to be on the lookout for that. I already talked about the willingness to overlook red flags and typos. In an email from your CEO about $3 million going out the door and how he or she wants you to interface with a prominent lawyer who's going to contact you from London, you're not going to expect to see a multitude of typos. In the Zoom case, we saw an email that referred to a federal agency that didn't even exist. We need to be confidential. We need to be confidential because the Federal Market Authority is regulating this transaction. What? There's no such thing as the Federal Market Authority, but there's a willingness to overlook these red flags. We see people or fraudsters preying on a pre-existing relationship of trust. This bullet point more applies to the bogus invoice version of the scam that we talked about earlier. So in that version of the scam, the two cases we worked on that dealt with that version, we're seeing people who receive an email that looks like it's coming from a landlord, or it looks like it's coming from a vendor with whom you've done business with for years and years and years. And so in those instances, you receive that email that from your landlord that says, hey, we're changing our bank account. Please wire your Q1 rent payment to this new bank account. You think nothing of it because you've got a pre-existing relationship with that vendor. But so you need to encourage telephone contact, just as Chris mentioned previously. Verify. Anytime there's a new wire account, a vendor wants to set up a new wire account, it doesn't matter how long you've been working with that entity, you have to verify all new wire recipients. We also see a lot in these cases illusory dual approval wire transfer protocols. So we get inside the company after one of these things hits, and we say, hey, what were your wire approval protocols that allowed this to happen? You just wired out $31 million. How'd that happen? In almost all cases, they say it met our policies because our requirement is simply that you need two people at the company to approve wires in these amounts. And oftentimes these aren't, this isn't $30 million going out the door at once. It's a series of $2, $3, $4 million wires. And so as long as you have a wire approval policy in place that says for wires under $5 million, you just need to receive two people's approval at the company to execute that wire, the fraudsters are in good shape because you get the victim who reaches out to some junior staff member on his team, whether it's treasury or accounting or whatever the case might be, and that person approves and authorizes the wire transfer without requiring much additional justification. I can't tell you much. It's for a confidential transaction. It has the CEO's approval already. And so in a lot of cases, the recommendations we've made is that you should require approvals outside of the treasury realm. You should require approvals from the CFO or the head of finance or the controller if it's above a certain amount. So that's another common denominator we're seeing. And we're also recommending lower dollar value thresholds. Require those additional approvals even if the wire is only for $100,000 or $500,000. Now, it's tough for a lot of these businesses because a lot of their business relies on them remitting or transmitting large dollar amounts on a daily basis. But the business slowdown may be worth the reward. And the last thing we're seeing is that the conduit banks and the wire recipients in almost all of the cases we have worked on, with one small exception, are in Asia. So we're seeing banks at large financial institutions in China and Hong Kong, or smaller, kind of the equivalent of credit unions type of financial institutions throughout Hong Kong and China that are serving as the conduit banks for these fraudsters. And so one of the most important things, if you catch one of these early, is to interface with those banks, both through law enforcement and through fraud alerts, to make sure that they are on the lookout and can block any access to those funds. Although in most cases, literally within an hour, the funds are being transferred out around the world, and our asset tracing techniques have been unsuccessful for the most part. And so those are the common denominators we've seen, and it's been a wild ride, kind of getting to know these investigations and these victims. But the more I think that we can take a step back and look at the commonalities and the root causes that are allowing this scam to fester, I should say, the better we can be about identifying proper techniques to train employees going forward. And so that's all I've got. Happy to open up the floor for any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Randy. Lots of really great information there. We did have a question come in from the audience over the course of your presentation that I wanted to pose to you, since it appears you'd be the right person to address this type of question. But the question is, are there any legal issues using corporate logos for a phishing test? You mentioned earlier that you did some online research and found ways to be able to phish your own employees, and I'm sure that Stu, coming up in a few moments, would have some ways he could help you with that as well. But when you're conducting your own internal phishing tests, are there any legal issues with using corporate logos for conducting that test?
So it's a great question, and one that I would want to research before I offered a definitive answer. And I will also defer to Stu, because I think he's got a lot of experience conducting this security awareness training. But my instinct is that I don't see a legal issue with using your own corporate logo to conduct an internal phishing test in that manner, but I, again, would want to think through that. One thing that we've noticed in these scams is that sometimes the spoofer gets lucky, and when the spoofed email comes into the company's email servers, those email servers will not only let it through, they will attach the picture of the CEO or the company's logo to the top of the Microsoft Outlook screen. And so it adds even more legitimacy or authenticity to that email, because you've got a picture of the CEO sitting right next to the email. And so I think it's important, as you do these security tests, maybe to try and mimic some of those possibilities, and that's one way to increase the perception of authenticity, I think, as a corporate logo.
Yes, no, that's a great point. One last question too is you made a note earlier around a case that your firm had worked on where you were able to stop the transfer of money over to the scammers. So just I don't know if you have necessarily any stats on this or just on your gut feel, but how often does it happen where even after the money is wired, that potentially that money could potentially be recovered, or at least the wire stopped? And are there any limits that are imposed on how much of that money could potentially be recoverable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So based on my experience in my conversations with the Bureau, they have told me that victims have been able to successfully recover stolen funds in these cases in less than 4% of these cases. And that's not all that surprising to me, given that in my experience, in one of the matters that I didn't talk about, we engaged law enforcement and reached out to the conduit bank, I'd say within 48 hours of the transfer happening, and they told us that there was no hope. It was gone. And so to me, it seems like if you don't immediately, and by immediately I mean within 24 hours of pushing send on that wire, if you're not working with law enforcement, local law enforcement authorities, and your bank to recover the proceeds, it's most likely gone. And the one case where we were successful, I think, is a huge outlier.
Yeah, great point. All right, thank you very much, Randy. Appreciate it, and we'll hear from you more during the Q&A portion of the webinar here coming up shortly. But at the moment, let's kick it over to Stu Showerman from KnowBe4, and let him have the floor for his presentation, and we'll have some questions for him at the end. Stu?
Hello, hello.
Hello, Stu.
Hi there. I'll flip through a couple of slides here. I was wondering if we were also going to do a poll anytime soon, if that was scheduled.
The poll was going to be after your slides, Stu.
Very good. Okay. So a little bit about us. We are well over 4,000 enterprise customers that all essentially use our platform to train employees to make smarter security decisions. And that ultimately means we help you to manage the ongoing problem of social engineering, which in this case translates to this either CEO fraud or business email compromise. It's basically the same thing. As you have heard the last hour, excuse me, as you have heard the last hour, the employee is the weak link in IT security. You've heard the numbers about the BEC and W2 scams. I'd like to just add to those that ransomware all by itself is also a $1 billion business, which is a very, very similar type of social engineering attack. And we've been talking a lot about controls. Yes, you do need a series of controls, and training would be, I think we all agree, the number one thing to approach this particular problem. Many people think that antivirus software is going to protect against these types of attacks. Unfortunately, that is simply a false sense of security. This graph you see on the right is a graph created by a website that is for the antivirus insiders. VirusTotal tests, and I'm looking at the graph. It may be a little hard to read, but VirusTotal tests proactive detection for antivirus products, and proactive detection means it looks at the behavior of a particular piece of malware and looks, well, is it behaving suspiciously? Okay, I'm going to block it. That is the X scale. The Y scale that goes from 50 to 100, yeah, they don't start at 0. The Y scale is reactive, means we know this, we know what this is. It is malicious, we block it. Most of these mainstream antivirus products score between 70 and 90. Nobody scores at 100. And so most of the messages that are coming through, like earlier said, these are forged headers. Antivirus simply doesn't catch this. So we've been talking for more than the last hour now. Well, how do you manage this particular problem? A series of controls need to go in. Yes, the phone. Call this person and see if there's anything that you can just verify by personal contact. However, you do need to get their awareness level up to a point where they will grab the phone. And that is what we have found over here. Best practice is you do a baseline test. So that means you are going to send a simulated phishing attack. Management knows about it, employees don't. And you see how many people click on that phishing attack. That's between 15 and 20% on average, sometimes a lot higher, sometimes lower. And once you have that number, which are click-happy people, you could also call them phish-prone. You have that, let's call it 20% number. You publicly announce that to all your employees and say, hey, we have a problem. We need to really get this fixed. We're going to do an awareness training program over the next year. And one of the things is we're going to send you an invite for an online training that you can do whenever you want. And second, we're going to send you frequent simulated phishing attacks to train you on how to recognize this stuff. And then obviously you can see the results. If you do this once a year, your program will fail. And that is what has given security awareness training in the past a bad rep. You can do this for compliance reasons, and yes, stick everyone in the break room, keep them awake with coffee and donuts, and death by PowerPoint. Yeah, you can check your PCI compliance. We do this, but it isn't working. So you need to correctly estimate the adversary and then your degree of commitment, it has to be up to par. And let's keep on going and understand what that means. What really is required to, and now we're talking about, to some degree, two different problems. The BEC fraud is, like earlier stated, very focused, and you have a small group of high-risk employees. Those we will go into and see how you can do an actual simulated CEO fraud attack. However, to protect your organization in a wider way, in a more, not just CEO fraud, but for instance against ransomware, we strongly recommend you train everyone from the mailroom up to the boardroom to make sure that they don't fall for these types of attacks. Like I said, you start with the baseline campaign. If you look at the graph to the right, the black line is representative of the amount of clicks over time. And what you want to see in your awareness training program is this line going down to hovering, approaching zero. It will never be zero. There are no absolutes, but you can certainly bring this down significantly. So this is a 6-month period. Over time, what we have seen when we tested this thing over about 300,000 employees, well over 3,000 entities, that you can start on roughly 16% on big averages, and over a year get it down to about 1%. And that's mainly due to frequent simulated phishing attacks. And so the real change that needs to occur is from top down, C-level on down, air cover and support for a corporate-wide change in security culture, and ideally announced by a C-level executive, ideally the CEO, who makes it clear to everyone that this is an initiative that needs to be supported, because the awareness training part of all your controls is for you guys the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do. It's got fast results and probably one of the fastest ROI that you can get. And what we also recommend is you conduct your phishing simulations like the bad guys do, which is you don't send the one phishing email to 40 employees all at the same time and then expect that something will get through. People will warn another next to them with, hey, don't click on that phishing link. So that's what we call prairie dogging. The way to not get that done is you send your simulated attacks with time intervals, and everyone gets a different template. We call that random. And that means everyone needs to take 2 seconds and look at that email in their inbox and think, is this a scam or not? Talking about the CEO's email, you can take personalization just a little more. What happens in these focused attacks that we talked about in the last hour, obviously they have their first name. You can go a little further. You can name the people that are also part of their close co-workers. So that's one of the reasons that you can easily go and take a simulated phishing attack, have their first name in there, have a coworker in there, have their bank name in there, make it totally real. Also, what was suggested is take a picture of the CEO. Sometimes email grabs this and just adds it. That's what happened with us. My controller received an email 2 weeks after she started, spoofed with my picture right next to it. So very easy to fall for that kind of stuff. Here is one example, relatively simple, as opposed to the long letter that you saw before. These are done in relatively large volumes. No one is exempt. No one is discriminated. They go for small businesses. They go for large enterprise. Significant amounts of money are being requested. So that's the kind of thing you have to train key executives for, and even small 10-person businesses that, for instance, escrow offices, or again, like law offices that handle mortgages. Anybody who is using relatively large amounts of money on a day-to-day basis through wiring is a target. And so once you have done your baseline, you have sent everyone an online training, could be 15, could be 30 minutes, and you start sending frequent phishing attacks you can analyze, and then you can find who are the people that fall for these types of attacks. If you find out you have multiple clickers or click-happy employees, you can step up the training, you can do remedial training, you can have them have a chat with their immediate supervisor to start with. If click behavior continues, they can have a chat with HR, up to and including a written warning that if this kind of behavior continues, they are actually actively endangering the network. So that's not the kind of thing that you can tolerate in any environment. We have a few resources for you that you can actually free resources that you can test. You can go and sign up for a free phishing security test for 100 employees. That's free. If you want to do more, just give us a call. We have a Phish Alert button for Outlook that is actually a download. You can just grab that file, deploy it to Outlook, and every time an employee sees something fishy, they just click on a button. And then that email gets forwarded to your incident response. We can also help you with something very interesting, which we call the domain spoof test. It is surprising and dismaying, as a matter of fact, how many email servers are not configured correctly. 9 out of 10, we send people one simple phishing email, and we sail right through. It gets straight in their inbox with a spoofed email address. So if you would want us to do that, go to our website, fill out the form, and we will test this with you, and we'll let you know if we can get through or not. And then there's a couple of different resources that you can grab related to ransomware. So that essentially is the short list of things that you can use to do something about it. And from what I understand, we now have a quick poll.
Before we go to the poll, Stu, we're going to have a quick question for you, just based off of your presentation. So,
sure.
And in the interest of time, let's try to keep the answers somewhat brief if it's possible. But how can we educate C-levels, and not only C-levels, but a lot of the people who are being targeted for these types of scams, whether it be finance and legal, treasury, HR? How can we make sure these folks who are honestly considered too busy for training, right? A lot of employees in a lot of organizations have a lot of things that they're doing on a regular basis, and training is a very difficult thing to get them to do, regardless if it's security training or otherwise. So how do we educate these folks who are typically too busy for training about these threats, and how do we get them to care about not only educating themselves but also their teams as well?
Well, I would, in that case, start with a simulated phishing attack. Our platform allows spoofing. So you could send these people, your high-risk employees, a spoofed CEO email with, hey, I need you to quickly transfer so-and-so. We can even track if someone answers. So if they fall for it, there will be an immediate, call it learning moment, if you will, which then gets their point up to, well, I guess I need a little bit of training. I mean, even 5 or 10 minutes of training is worth more than nothing. And, you got to eat. Do this over a lunch break if you have to.
Yep, that's a great point. All right, let's move on to the poll question. All right, so our poll question is, how would you best describe your organization, or how your organization currently does security awareness training? 5 options for you. We do nothing and rely on our filters. Break room, herd all users once a year into the break room. Monthly short security video, phishing tests to high-risk employees, and human firewall. We train all employees online and send frequent phishing attacks. Let's give you all a moment to answer that question, and while you're doing that, I'll pose another audience question to the group, and anyone who feels comfortable taking this can grab it. It's probably going to be more relevant to Chris or Randy, but anybody can certainly jump in. If email systems are clearly flagging emails that did not originate internally within the company, do you think that, let me ask the question again. If email systems clearly flagged emails that did not originate internally within the company, do you think that this would help prevent many of these scams from being effective?
Yeah, this is, thanks, Tom, and thanks to the listener who asked that question. This is Chris. That's a great question. I mean, that is one of the methods by which we are, kind of doing the reverse funnel, right? We want to make sure that we have, SPF on, DKIM on, that we have other tools in place to spot those email anomalies as they come in, so that only the real sophisticated emails regarding BEC and CEO fraud are making their way into the company. So that is one of those tools in the tool set. With that said, unlike phishing emails with payloads, either web links that bring you to websites that have malicious code on them or that contain a malicious package, such as an attachment, it is harder to detect those types of emails fully and remove them from the inboxes of your employees. But certainly, what the individual who asked the question is suggesting could be one of those tools that that can help to mitigate those types of things coming into the company. Remember, we want to keep if 100 emails are making their way towards the company a day, we want there only to be 1 or 2 or 3 that actually make their way through, and for those people that receive them to be able to spot them and immediately report them and delete them. So it really is that reverse funnel that we want to instill, and that's one of the controls that can be used.
Great, good answer. Thank you very much. All right, let's take a look at the poll results. And it looks like the overwhelming majority was the human firewall answer. We train all employees online and send frequent phishing attacks. That would seem to contradict the comment that was made earlier around the number of employees or number of companies that are actually doing phishing training. So I guess I'll pose this question. Do these results surprise you, given some of those comments made earlier?
Let me jump on this one. That's good. We are very happy that it gets this high. A year ago, it was only 23%, so there's definitely improvement. I would, of course, venture to say that you kind of have to get this up to 80 or 90% total for the bad guys to get discouraged and go do something else, because it is still to some degree shooting fish in a barrel. But this is good.
Indeed, encouraging indeed. Just seems somewhat contradictory to some of the comments made earlier, but certainly encouraging if it's true. All right, let's go on to the second poll question. We have one more for you all today. And our second question is, have you experienced a CEO fraud type of attack? And your three answers are, sadly, yes, we fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. Yes, but we didn't fall for it. Or no, you haven't been targeted for these types of attacks. And again, we'll give you a moment to answer the question, and I'll throw another question out there to our panelists. So how about, this was covered a little bit over the course of, I think, everybody's presentation, but it's obviously important to have a good mix of timing as it relates to doing security awareness training. Stu mentioned, you don't want to do it just once a year because the message gets lost on people. Is there a sweet spot in which you continue to reinforce training with users such that you're keeping that training and you're keeping the lessons learned from that training top of mind? And again, that's for any of the panelists to take.
Anybody? Want me to jump in here?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. Would you then rephrase that question for a moment?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned earlier, Stu, that you don't want your security awareness training to be part of an annual compliance exercise because the message gets lost on people. So how often, or is there a sweet spot by which you should continue to train users such that the concept of what they learned from their previous phishing awareness training stays top of mind, so that when the inevitable attack does come in, they're more aware of the fact that this particular email may be suspicious, as opposed to that annual exercise where the message gets lost on them and they may be more prone to attack, or maybe more prone to falling victim to the attack.
Well, we found, we've done a recent analysis on a large body of data. We found that at least once a month, receiving a simulated phishing attack is the minimum. Funnily enough, though, we've had a data scientist look at millions of records, and they recently came up with the finding that sending 2 per month actually is better. So that's the kind of thing that you can take as, call it best practice, but once every 90 days is just not enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great point. All right, let's take a look at the poll results and see where everybody landed. So it looks like most companies have either not received a BEC type phishing scam, or they did, but they didn't fall for it. It looks like quick math in my head, almost well, vast majority didn't fall for it, didn't receive one. I'm sorry for those who did fall for it. Hopefully, what you learned today will help educate you and your employees on how to prevent exploitation of these types of attacks going forward. So let's kick it over to the open Q&A portion for a moment, and in the interest of time, we'll keep the number of questions fairly short, just so we can make sure we're respective of everybody's time who's going to be on the webinar today. So one question that came in from the audience prior to the webinar was, how can companies create a work environment that's enjoyable, but also maintain the highest level of security possible, right? I think the question here is mostly focusing around how do we ensure that we are enabling our employees and treating security as an enabler of the business, as opposed to being a disabler as it relates to how we're protecting our employees from these types of scams.
Yeah, this is Chris. I'll take that. Yeah, this is Chris. I mean, look, the one, especially as it relates to this topic, regarding phishing testing, as well as BEC, CEO fraud types of scenarios, you want to make sure we're doing a carrot and not a stick on this. This is not a time and opportunity for, HR policies galore and other policies where people fail certain numbers of phishing tests. Their rights are terminated, or access to the internet is turned off, or it goes into performance reviews and all the rest. We want to develop a holistic individual, which means that you're supporting the goods and services of the organization that you're working at. There are some nice, fun ways to do phishing testing, especially, gummy bear fish or gummy fish, certain different types of campaigns and competitions that you can have, and keeping tabs on who clicked, who didn't click, and have pizza parties for different business groups that win, those types of things. Always much, much more important to emphasize the good, keep people's time and attention, as opposed to, oh no, not another security gotcha again. And that can be taken to the nth degree on any other controls, but as related to email and BEC and CEO and type of phishing, types of things, I think that's one rule to live by. Positive is always much more strong than a negative.
Absolutely. All right, and one final question, and this may be geared more towards Stu, but I think Chris or Randy, I think this is certainly relevant for either of you also. But and maybe Stu's opinion might be a little bit biased on this topic, so maybe it's a better question for you two. But how effective are LMS for cybersecurity training? How effective do you typically find these types of resources to be?
An LMS is essentially just in itself just a platform to deliver web-based training in usually the SCORM format. You can drop any course in there. That doesn't have to be in a security awareness training course. So LMSs in general are very effective if you have the correct courseware that you deliver to your employees. And there's good courseware, there's bad, and there's free. So the LMS itself isn't really critical. That's just the delivery mechanism.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and this is
All
Chris.
right.
I would say real quickly, look, you need to hit and address and reach all your employees in multiple different ways. Some of that involves online training, in-person training, oral, spoken, fun events, all the rest. LMS is just one aspect. You really want to train the whole individual and all the individuals depending upon their learning typology within the company. Certainly, this is an important part of it, a learning management system. But not the sole element.
We agree.
All right. Well, let's start to put a bow on this webinar today, and let's move into some closing thoughts and comments. Let's keep our comments to 1 to 2 minutes tops, just in the interest of time. Randy, why don't you kick us off for some closing remarks?
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. I will just echo sort of one of the primary messages that I hope we've imparted today, which is that companies need to stay vigilant. It appears that this scam, notwithstanding how sort of goofy and unsophisticated it sometimes seems, continues to flourish, and companies should institute steps to train specifically for ways to prevent and detect this scam. There's some easy tools out there that Microsoft and other servers offer that you just want to make sure are turned on. IT controls, wire approval controls, and then educating people. I think those are the key messages for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Randy. Chris.
Well, I think the big takeaway here is that there is no one silver bullet to preventing BEC and CEO compromise. However, at the end of the day, we are talking about creating an atmosphere and an environment in which humans, our employees, our personnel, feel compelled, feel an urgency, feel a need to go ahead and respond to something very, very quickly in a special and unique manner. We have to be able to break that chain in order to break the chain of successful cyber fraud attempts that are occurring with increasingly regularity. This is a people, process, and technology problem. We can go back to basics on this, and that human interaction piece is just absolutely, absolutely critical. So really, appreciate the time here, appreciate everyone else's thoughts, and best of luck to everyone.
Thank you. And Stu.
Yes. There's nothing much more that I can add. Totally agree with people, process, and technology. I am, an ex-IT security guy. We've been doing software for decades, but the people part of the security stack and your procedures is truly where you will get the biggest return and also the fastest. So that is what we at this point in time have found to be still lacking in many organizations, and having people understand and be aware of red flags related to this type of fraud is your best protection.
Indeed. Not much I can certainly add to the comments that have made by the three of you. I mean, not only over the course of your presentations, but in your closing remarks. I think, just to wrap things up, I think vigilance is key, as Randy noted a moment ago. I think another thing to make sure you're aware of as well is to make sure you're educating yourself, right? No, don't just make sure you're educating your employees on the dangers of phishing, but make sure you are educating yourself on the new types of scams that are occurring and the rate at which they're changing. There are many different types of resources online, blogs, through various three-letter agency sites, through the FBI, the IRS. They have posts specifically on their website through their newsrooms about these types of BEC scams and how you can educate yourself. The Internet Crime Complaint Center also has some media releases as well about these. Various blogs and websites. So make sure that you're educating yourself, and make sure that you find other means by which to educate your employees as well, whether it's through internal blogs, internal newsletters, internal intranet sites, however you use to push information down to your employees. Make sure they're aware of the types of scams you're seeing as well, so that they can educate themselves outside of their typical security awareness and phishing training exercises. So with that, those are my final comments. I'll kick it back over to Tom to take us home. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining today. And thank you for those who stuck it out with us for the additional 15 minutes. I know we ran a little bit long today. Go ahead, Tom.
Great. Thanks, Sam. We hope that you enjoyed today's program and have some actionable items that you can begin implementing within your organization. Be sure to download the certificate of attendance from the menu bar at the bottom of the window. The yellow icon document will be your certificate of attendance. It's usually a pop-up, so you may need to enable that function. If not, you will receive an email that you can use as proof of attendance. If you don't see that or you are having problems with the certificate, go ahead and just send me an email, tomb@secureworldexpo.com. We would like to thank Chris, Randy, Stu, and Sam for lending their time and expertise to our web conference program. Additionally, we'd like to thank our sponsor, of course, KnowBe4, for helping to make today's event possible. And of course, we'd like to thank you, our Secure World audience, for helping make this program a success. Stay on top of your certification requirements by attending all of our summer web conferences. Visit our website for the complete schedule of what we have coming up. CPE credit is available for attending all Secure World webcasts, whether you attend them live or on demand. If you have questions, idea for a future topic, or would like to share your expertise with our audience, please feel free to shoot me an email. Again, it's Tom or Tom B, either one will go to me, at secureworldexpo.com. And be sure to visit our site for our latest in security news, our regional conference schedule, as well as the Secure World Post, our aggregated news source, along with our own genuine content. On behalf of the Secure World Digital team, I'd like to thank you for your time and participation today. This does conclude our broadcast.